Good afternoon. I am super excited to talk about managing expectations as part of our skills series. I think this is one that unfortunately gets overlooked a lot, and I find it to be the challenge that a lot of agents face when they're coming to me as a broker is mainly because things weren't said or done up front to prevent a lot of the anger or frustrations that sometimes we run into. Now, there's always things that are outside of our control. So I certainly don't expect that everything is going to go perfectly all the time. But I do know that helping people have appropriate expectations for what the transaction looks like, how you serve them, and what to expect as they close and then move into their new home, that is a big deal. If we can help manage those expectations up front, we can make sure that we get a five-star review, because a lot of times just having a situation where there's no surprises or unexpected extras that are in the negative side of things can make the difference between someone writing that great review or having a sour taste in their mouth. And that kind of unfortunately puts a downward spiral on the whole experience of buying or selling a home. So with that in mind, I'm going to jump into our presentation and we're going to go through some things that I know up front that I think can help with understanding how do expectations happen. So real quickly, I want to talk first through what happens when we have unmet expectations. As you all may know, generally you get a few different reactions. You might get the silent treatment if someone is upset with the way something went. You might get an outburst of anger. And for those that have challenges controlling their anger, sometimes it can get really ugly. And you might just have those that are frustrated, that bottle it up and end up with expectations that maybe are not being met throughout the wholesale, and you don't find out until later. And that's a really unhealthy place to be. What I do know is that unfortunately, most adults are not well versed in emotional intelligence and how to handle their own expectations or what happens when expectations are not met. And so it's up to us to be that consummate professional to really show up and help them manage the ups and downs that happen in a real estate sale. It's a lot of emotions already going on. So sometimes it's just that one little thing that can twist everything out of context or can spiral out of proportion, because it's just that proverbial needle in a haystack that just kind of becomes the thing that tips everything in the wrong direction. And so what we want to do is help keep hope and happiness and fun at the forefront of the experience, and manage the expectations that come along with it that sometimes they may not even know they have. And so with that, I'm going to jump into how do we have expectations that are unmet. And I think there's four ways, and I learned this through a wonderful book series that I was going through a few years ago about emotional intelligence. And I just love the way it laid out very clearly things that we may not have thought about, but we can definitely do something about. So the four situations are unconscious expectations, unrealistic expectations, unspoken expectations, and unagreed upon expectations. So I want to unpack these really quickly, because this is meant to be just a lunch and learn where you get kind of a surface view of some things that may help you with taking action, but we're not going to dive real deep into this as a study. The first one is unconscious. These are generally a bias that we have, whether it's from an upbringing or whether it's from past experiences, but they're an expectation that we carry with us because of the way something has been perceived or done previously. And the way we often know about this is when we feel disappointed about something. We realize, oh, I thought it was going to be this and it wasn't, right? And so we have these unconscious expectations that we carry with us all the time. Our clients do too, and we have to acknowledge that. And again, for me, we'll talk about what happens in the consultation, but I think when you address these kinds of things up front, it's a really helpful thing to understand or unpack maybe what unconscious expectations they have, such as maybe their unconscious expectation is that the whole thing is going to be like it's, on HGTV because that's what their sister told them it's like. Well, we all know that's not reality, right? And so that leads us into unrealistic. Sometimes we have to have those reality checks in place. Sometimes unrealistic expectations are there because of what someone else said or because of what they've seen. And we have to unpack that and make sure that we are setting the story straight. So a prime example of an unrealistic expectation that I feel our industry has done a poor job of communicating to the public is that we're available 24/7. And unfortunately, the reality is we're not robots. We cannot be available 24/7. And so to perpetuate that unrealistic expectation to our clients who think we should be on call all the time creates a problem, right? There's inevitably going to be a situation where you're not available and then their expectations are unmet because they were unrealistic to begin with. The next one is unspoken. This is where you have an expectation you know about, but you don't necessarily share it. And our clients do that all the time. It's really important for us to ask them up front what expectations they may have. Their unspoken expectation may be that if they text us, that we're going to respond within 5 minutes, right? And while we may be able to do that sometimes, or even a lot of the times, if that is their expectation and we haven't discussed that up front, I don't know that that's their expectation. I may be thinking, oh, I'll get back to them after my appointment finishes. And all of a sudden, we've got a disconnect because my expectation and their expectation aren't the same. And so we have to get these out on the table. And the last one is unagreed upon. And this is really at the forefront of a lot of sales experiences that go south. If there are expectations that others have of us, or vice versa, that we have of them, and we cannot agree upon those expectations, it's probably best that we part ways right up front. And do you agree? It is not fun to get into a situation where both parties are constantly frustrated because the other does not work well with the person that you're there. I have had that happen, and not through lack of effort or even stellar service, but sometimes people have expectations that I just can't agree to. And I know that it's best if I don't work for them. It's best if I actually say, you know what, I may not be the right person for you, but I believe that someone is great for you. Let me help introduce you to another agent that can probably work the way you do. And that's okay. We don't have to be all things to all people, but we do have to recognize these things so that we can stop the challenges before they even begin. And a lot of our job is risk mitigation, right? We are trying to make sure that we are handling a complex legal situation with as much wisdom and guidance as we can to hopefully lower the risk for our clients and for our brokerages and make sure that everybody comes out of it excited and thrilled with the outcomes. And hopefully that gets us that 5-star review that we all want so much. With that, I'm going to jump into how do you overcome these and how do you stop these situations from becoming a part of what you experience with a client? And so I think there's a couple of things that, I think there's a couple of things that we can do that really help. The first is just ask relevant questions. I think sometimes we jump into asking questions that maybe are not as relevant as we think they are. And while it's very common for us to go through what kind of house do you want? Where do you want to live? I think there's some other questions that we need to have in our consultation up front to get to the discovery phase of are we a good fit to work together? Because I never make the assumption that every person who wants to buy or sell is a good fit for my business. I have to come in with curiosity and say, let's discover if we're actually good for each other. And so those relevant questions are going to seek to understand who they are as a person, what their expectations are. And so a relevant question might be, when's the last time you bought or sold real estate? And what was your experience? Because I want to know, what did they learn from that, or how did they perceive the way the real estate transaction went? It might also be one of my favorite questions is things about like what are your preferred methods of communication? I ask that a lot. Are there limitations to communications? So, for instance, do you have hours where maybe at work you're not allowed to be on a phone or respond to a personal text? Are there certain responsibilities that you have Maybe they're caring for an elderly person and they need to be able to not have phone calls, but they can answer texts or emails better. But finding out how they want to communicate and when, those are important to helping us determine right up front, how are we going to work together and consciously decide what our pattern is going to be. How do we make sure that as a team, we're both winning, right? And getting some of those relevant questions asked up front really help with making sure that nobody is frustrated down the road. I have some clients that all they want to do is text. And while that's wonderful, I do set the expectation up front that that's not realistic. Because again, going back to those four things that we know creep up and destroy a good rapport, if they have an unrealistic expectation that they can do everything in a one sentence text, and yet we know that we're going to be negotiating some hard terms, there's going to be some things that I need to give a great explanation to. There might be an inspection report we need to go over in depth. It's not likely we can do those things by text. And so if we are helping our clients with understanding what the expectations are, that I will default to text as much as possible if that's your preference. But when I call, it means that there's something important to discuss that can't be done by text. And so, again, helping make sure that we set those expectations up front so they know what it's going to be like working through a transaction with us and what it's going to be like from other people. I also ask them, do you have preferred partners you want to work with? If they already know an inspection company or a title company or a lender, I want to know that up front because we need to pull those people into our circle and start working together and collaborating. And so those are important and relevant questions to make sure that I'm not assuming that I'm going to refer them an inspection company and I've come to find out that they already have one and now they feel like I just stepped on their toes. So those are some of the ways that we can get to hopefully overcoming these four areas right up front. Next, active listening. This is so critical for success. We overcome unmet expectations by listening. Don't always accept the first thing that someone says as the truth. Dig a little deeper. Have a tell me more attitude. Seek to find out what is the story beneath the story. I'll give you some examples that come up because I think it's really important to ask, and I'll give you a key question I use. But how often have you asked someone, how many bedrooms do you need? And they right off the bat, they give you an answer. Oh, I need 4. And we just write it down and then we keep going. And do you need a single story or 2-story? And do you need a yard? And we just have our list of things we think we need to know before we start working with someone to set up a search. And what I found is when I take time to ask them, why do you need 4 or what's important to you about having 4 bedrooms? Then I start to find out, oh, well, my daughter has this, my wife needs this room for this, my son needs this room, I need an office. And then all of a sudden I'm going, wait, an office. An office isn't a bedroom. What if I was able to search for something such as 3 bedrooms plus a den? Would that be acceptable to you? And if they say yes, I've now opened up a whole lot more inventory and possibility to them just by digging a little deeper and not taking their first answer at face value. One of the things I really love to ask is why is that important to you? And because again, it just helps understand if you're listening what they may want versus what they may need and what they may think about how they use their home or what it is. A lot of times in the listing consultations, I also run into agents who just want to go through again a series of questions, but they don't stop to ask the seller, what's most important to you in this sale? I can't tell you how many times I've found that it wasn't price. And yet, our assumption, a lot of times, because we're not operating in curiosity, we come with a pride that says, I think I know what everybody wants. We forget to dig for what really is most important so that we can serve them at the highest level. So, I want to encourage you to ask some questions and then use your active listening skills, hopefully, that prompts you to ask additional questions like, tell me more, or how does that affect the outcome, so that you can hopefully guide them to the right outcomes by making sure you understand what they really truly need. Next, We're going to talk about finding out what's most important. So, oftentimes when I'm in a consultation, I will ask this right up front because, again, I want to know what the unconscious or even maybe unspoken expectations are that a client has that they haven't told me. And so I have to ask them, what is most important to you? What is a deal breaker? Is it this price? Is it doesn't have this feature? Is it doesn't sell in this amount of time? We need to actually understand what's most important. A lot of times with buyers, this comes down to wants versus needs. We've all had clients who said, I want this, and this, and they give you their top 10 features that they want for their home. And then we have to ask the question, which is a want and which is a need? And as you start to listen to them, sometimes you'll even have partners who can't agree on what things are most important. One may say it has to have a pool, and the other one may say, well, no, it has to have the island kitchen. And you're thinking, okay, but if we can have it all, let's try and get you both what you want. Understanding what is a deal breaker, though, if someone says, I will not buy a house if it doesn't have a third car garage, whatever it may look like for them, they know what their needs are, then understanding that up front is so important. I have had in my career many clients come to me, and I'm the second or third or fourth agent maybe that they've worked with. And amazingly, as I start to ask them questions, they're like, I've never had anyone ask these kinds of questions before. And I said, well, I really want to understand you as a person and your lifestyle and what's important to you. But most importantly, what I hear them say more often than not is they sent me listings that didn't match what I wanted. And I had that aha moment of ding, 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 ding. They have already had an experience of someone who did not ask relevant questions, didn't use active listening skills, and didn't find out what was important to them to know what would make or break a sale. And so they're just sending them all sorts of stuff that's wasting their time and frustrating the client. And we've got a serious case of expectations that are unmet. And so if you can go through this series of questions and actually find out what really is the difference maker between whether you would make a decision to buy or not make a decision, or whether you would choose to sell at this time or not, then you know whether or not the circumstances or the parameters line up to serve them. And it's okay if it's not the right time. I think it's most important for us as servants to actually find out, is this the right time and the right place and the right way for them? And it's okay to take a back seat and just wait if it's not. All right. Next, this is so important, is explaining how you work. And I put this in here to be clear up front because I think it's so important that you have clarity. If you don't have clarity on how you work and what's important to you, how are you going to articulate it to your client? For all of us as professionals, we have to sit down and determine what ways am I willing to work, and can I communicate that to my client so they understand it before we start working together. These should include things like my availability. Am I available on nights? If so, what time does that stop? My accessibility. Will I step out of meetings to handle a call from them, or will they need to wait and I'll return calls within 2 hours? Or maybe I have a response time of email of 4 hours. We need to be able to set our standards of practice and communicate what our clients can expect from us. If they have had it communicated and they agree to that, and I actually have a service guarantee form that I give to them that outlines these things. The beauty of that is that after they get to see how and why I set my expectations, they can then agree or not agree. And if they don't agree and they want to work with someone else who maybe has more availability than I do, or maybe communicates differently than I do, or maybe lives in a different area and specializes in a specific neighborhood, all of those things are great. They should absolutely pursue working with the agent that's the best fit for them. But if I've explained how I work and they've agreed to it, and then later on in the sale, we have a problem come up because they're upset that something didn't happen in a time frame or in a way that they wanted, I now have that sheet to go back and reference and say, remember when we sat down and I explained that if I'm in a class like now, I'll return your call within 2 hours. Well, that's what happened today. And I need you to be patient, or I need you to call my assistant or call the office if it's truly urgent. But setting those expectations and then reminding them of the agreement diffuses the situation. And I found that that often helps us get back on track very quickly, build rapport again, and continue towards a successful closing. So be clear up front. Share what your priorities in your life are. Share how you run your business and what they can expect of you. And think about some standards of practice that you're willing to uphold. Make sure you're realistic, because I promise you, if you miss meeting one of those expectations, it's not going to go well. But if you can honestly say, you know what, I respond to all email by the end of the day, that's a great expectation to set. And there's those rare emergencies where we can't. Maybe something happened unexpectedly to us, but in those kinds of emergency situations, most people are gracious and kind enough to be understanding that that was an exception. It was not the norm. And if you've been trustworthy up till now with setting expectations and fulfilling those expectations, it becomes a whole lot easier to have grace from them when you need it. All right. Oops, my slideshow just reset. So let me go through some Q&A, and I want to talk about some common scenarios very quickly as we finish up. And hopefully you guys will be able to tell me if you've had some of these scenarios in your world, and talk through what does it look like. So this is where I really want to get some engagement on what I've covered so far, and a little bit of what the common scenarios are. So we want to manage expectations to mitigate damage in the relationship and obviously earn a 5-star review. That's how we continue to grow our business, or one of the many ways we continue to grow our business. So have you ever had a situation where maybe you failed to ask what the communication preferences are, and then you found out they prefer a call versus a text? Or maybe they're the opposite. They prefer a text over a call. Has that ever happened?
Yeah, that happened to me.
Yeah,
So most of my clients are pretty young. And some of them, when I called them, they didn't even pick up. So I had to tell
yeah,
them, hey, this is quite important, and I cannot explain in text message or through social
good.
media. I
Yeah,
only call you when I really need to talk to you. So they get
sure.
it. Yeah.
That's good. And I will say I have found, not to the exclusion, and this is not to lump everybody in, but I have found that certain age definitely, as you mentioned, affects their preferences because it's what they've become accustomed to. I know with several of the people I've done transactions with, I'll have people text me and ask me to do something for them. And one of the things I've learned to do, because I know my own shortfalls, and by the end of the day, I'll have 30 text messages, and that one will have been buried 7 deep, right? I have learned to say, you know what, can you email that to me? Because I can't mark it as unread on my text. I can't flag it for follow up when it's in text. If it's an actual to do, I need it in a different way for me and the way I run my business, because too often early on, I learned that I dropped the ball forgetting about a text that came in 3 hours ago because I've had 35 texts since then. And so that's just one of the ways I've now learned to set expectations, is to ask them, would you mind communicating this to me in a different way? And if they aren't in agreement, I will do my best to stop, take a note. But, again, I just know with so much going on, sometimes we're really busy, other times not so much. But when we're really busy or being pulled in a bunch of different directions, that's one way that I like to make sure that I can follow up on things and make sure that nothing gets dropped. Or I'll ask them, would you contact my assistant? Another thing is making sure, not setting an expectation that if you do a good job, you want them to write a testimonial. I see this quite a bit, and it's amazing to me when I ask agents, how do you get testimonials? They don't have a plan for it. And I think about, how often, if we had set expectations up front and say, you know what, my intention is to deliver such stellar service that you are excited to write a 5-star review for me when this is over. how beautiful is that if you're setting that expectation up front so that when you go and ask for that testimonial at the end, they're not surprised by it? Because again, we've set an expectation. We've communicated, if I do this, I expect you to write this 5-star review. And I think that's one of the best ways we can get more reviews. And that's a struggle for a lot of agents. They don't know how to get more. And I'm thinking part of it is just you haven't set the expectation that that is a reciprocation for the service that you're providing to the client, that you need them to cooperate and do that with you. Another common scenario is just not doing that full consultation up front. How often, do we get the call about 1234 Main Street and I'd like to see it this afternoon at 3:00, right? And as agents, we don't want to lose out on a potential prospect. We don't want to make them feel like we're, all of a sudden gonna interrogate them. But at the same point in time, we have to find that balance of, you know what, I'd love to show you this home and I'm happy to give you one free look. But for my clients, I like to provide full service. And that means I do a consultation to really understand what you want, what you need, what's important to you, and how you expect me to serve you best. And if I can do that up front, you'll end up having a much better experience. Does that sound good to you? How many times do people say yes? Almost always, because they understand that I'm going to treat it differently. And I respect myself enough to believe that I'm more than just a showing agent that opens doors. I also expect them to treat me like a professional when I put the brakes on just a little bit and say, back up, there's a process here that we need to follow to have a successful experience. That's another one. It's just making sure you do a consultation and slow down people who maybe don't understand what it is to purchase or sell a home or haven't done it in a while. Another common scenario, and I touched on this earlier, but explaining your work hours and off hours. I have a very good friend, Brent, out of Carlsbad, California, and he absolutely is not available on Sundays, ever. I love him for setting that standard, but as a young father and a husband, he wanted to make sure that he had a day off to recoup, to re-energize, to spend time with his family, and not be just an absentee husband or dad. And so he has autoresponders on his texts and on his email and on his voicemail. But more importantly, he tells every client right up front, this is a non-negotiable for me. I will not work Sundays. That means if someone gives us a response deadline of Sunday, we're going to have to respond Saturday, or we're going to have to make sure they know that we will not be responding in the time frame they gave us. And his clients are overwhelmingly okay with that because they know the quality of service he delivers. And it's a very rare thing in our industry, I think, for agents to draw that hard line in the sand. But I think it's so important for us to make sure that we communicate. What is it that we do or don't do? What happens when we're away for a conference? Or do we have a backup, or do they have to wait to see a home until we return home? Again, setting those expectations is really important. I'll say another one that I do is before I leave on a conference, I will call all of my active clients and my active prospects and explain, I'm leaving. I'm going to be out of town this date to this date. Just want to set expectations that I'm going to be slower to respond to you. And that is exactly what I say. I will still respond, but you need to know I'm in classes all day. I'm in networking events. I'm in meetings, and I am not here with boots on the ground to be as accessible as I normally am. And so it's a different scenario, and I just want you to be aware that I may be slower to respond. If it's urgent, here's how you go about getting a direct response. And I give them the ways and the people to contact if they can't reach me because I'm sitting in a meeting or a class. So again, it's just communicating. So much of this is just making sure that there are no surprises and thinking strategically about how do we set someone up to succeed. The other thing about expectations that I run into a lot is helpfulness. This is an interesting thing. I think for most of us, we want to be helpful, and we don't realize that we often come across as telling them we'll help you with everything until we don't. And then it becomes, again, a challenge because we've got an unmet expectation. So for instance, if we talk about how I'm here to hold your hand every step of the way, and then they're filling out the seller disclosure statements and they run into something and they say, can you fill this out or can you answer this question for me? And we say, no, I can't answer those questions for you. They might be frustrated, and understandably so. If we have not communicated that upfront, there are certain things we cannot do for you. There are certain disclosures we cannot make. There are certain things we cannot advise on, such as what type of people live in a neighborhood or the schools. We can't do anything that touches on fair housing. And so if we, again, are not communicating, these are our boundaries legally and ethically in our industry. These are the things we cannot discuss or help you with. It's understandable when a client comes back and says, well, you're not being very helpful. And so, again, setting expectations about what we're allowed to do in being helpful and what we're not allowed to do can help deviate from a lot of those tense situations where the client maybe feels like you're not doing your job. I think at the end of the day, we want to talk about, just again, giving a no surprise experience unless it's a positive extra mile kind of opportunity that we have to do something delightful for them. Otherwise, we want no surprises. We want to help the client know that this is going to be just smooth and easy, and we've got everything in hand. We need to have those conversations up front about time is of the essence. What does that look like for them? How do we expect them to respond when we have contractual deadlines that have to be met? And so that's a lot of what I wanted to cover just on some of the scenarios, common scenarios we run into where clients might be frustrated because we have not met their expectations, even though we could have maybe avoided that by having a very upfront conversation about what we can and can't do. Any questions?
No.
Okay. Any other scenarios that you think need to be discussed or covered? Anything that you feel we didn't cover today?
No, I think you mentioned like an example of someone who said they want 4 bedrooms, and then after you ask more questions, actually 3 bedrooms plus an office works as well. I think that's really good because I often have clients told me that how many bedroom and what's the budget, and then
Yes.
afterwards they always go on Zillow or Redfin to search for homes that they didn't tell me before.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, that
And
was
actually, that's another common scenario that we run into in the real estate space. We should be setting expectations that our clients, we acknowledge that they're looking on other sites, and that's okay. Our job's not to control how or why or where they look for real estate, but we do need to explain why and how the methods we use may be superior to that, because we need to give them the choice and guide them through. If you're sending me this house this day, this house this day, this house this day, and you don't realize that it doesn't have this that you told me you needed, or it doesn't meet this because the HOA is too high and now it puts you out of your ratios for your qualification for your loan, or it doesn't have this, they don't understand all of that unless we communicate it. And so I have found that, again, doing that consultation up front and acknowledging we know people cheat on us. We know that they go and look at other websites, but here's what you're missing out by doing that. And in fact, you're wasting a lot of time, because while I'm looking up that house that you found that doesn't match, we just missed out on another house that came on the market that I should have been, scheduling a showing for. And so when you help them understand that what we invest our time into is really intended to serve them at the highest level and make it a seamless experience, I think it goes a long ways towards them not having the impetus to go look at all these other websites, or maybe not to bring up every house that they find on those websites if it doesn't match what we've got on our search. In our MLS, thankfully, we also have this beautiful thing called Coming Soon. I know not every MLS has that, but one of the reasons why our clients are best served by using the MLS search is because they can actually see properties that aren't syndicated and on the market anywhere else. And that is a strategic advantage to our clients if we are setting up the search correctly to include all of those Coming Soon listings. And so, slowly but surely helping them get used to using a different app than they've used, or using a website that they haven't used before, they start to find though that they have dialed in a much better picture of what properties are appropriate, or getting better, again, pricing comparisons for those that are sellers, because we can get AVMs or estimates on other websites that are not as accurate because their parameters aren't as tight as the ones we use when we're setting up searches for our clients, and come to it with the local knowledge. So great thing to consider. Well, with that, I'm going to sign off. I hope this was really helpful for you. I just wanted to go over some basic skill building on how do you help set appropriate expectations with your clients? How do you manage unmet, unconscious, uncommunicated, or unagreed upon expectations from our clients? Because a lot of times we have a responsibility to head those off as much as we can up front and make sure that their experience is really a positive one. And then how do we just up our game with just being the professional that understands what questions to ask, how to host a consultation, how to set standards, and again, communicate what our availability is, and of course, what we will and won't do to serve them, so that hopefully they're very happy and they understand we've done everything we could and then some, and met every expectation that they had. I hope that you have a great week in real estate, and appreciate you stopping by to take this class.
Bye.
Bye.